Okay, so hello and welcome to ITENM's webinar. Today we're going to be presenting on the Meaningful Use Final Rule. No, I'm sorry, that's not right at all. Today we're going to be presenting on, Lindsay, help me out here. What are we presenting on today?
Meaningful Use Audits.
Meaningful Use Audits, thank you. Forgot to change that in my speech. So today we're going to be presenting on Meaningful Use Audits. This is the 16th installment of our educational webinar series. We know it's an urgent topic for everyone, and we hope that we can provide some clarity on it. My name is Chelsea Grover, and I'm the Marketing Communications Coordinator for ITENF. I'd like to take a moment to explain the process for today's webinar. First, I'd like to mention that this webinar will be recorded. Next, I'm pleased to announce the dates of our upcoming webinars in this Government Regulations and Ramifications series. On October 18th, we will discuss EHR cloning. What is it, who's committing it, and how it affects your practice, and other important information. Then on December 2nd, we're going to cover the dangers of information blocking and its effect on interoperability, where we will help you discover if you are the victim of it or perhaps even participating in it, common practices, and how to combat it. Our final one in the series will be on the high-tech security and HIPAA, and it's on December 16th. Either register now on our website or keep your eyes out for a webinar invitation email from us. Okay, so meaningful use audits. At the end of the presentation, we're going to, it's not meaningful use audits. Yes, it is. I'm losing my mind today. I apologize. At the end of the presentation, we will open the floor up to questions from you. We will answer all the questions at the end, but you may type them in the questions area of the webinar control panel whenever they occur to you. For your reference, we will also be emailing links to the recordings of the PDF of the presentation later this week, as we do with every webinar. Finally, for audio clarity purposes, everyone's phone will remain muted throughout the entire webinar. If you experience audio issues, please use the chat box to let us know so we can resolve them. And again, questions may be entered in the questions box. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our presenters for today, Lindsay Lanning, Cindy Kincaid, and Kathy Thompson. Cindy and Kathy are going to be assisting with questions at the end. Unfortunately, Kathy is at home right now taking care of a sick dog, so she'll be participating via chat rather than on the phone. And Kathy, we hope that Luna starts feeling better soon. So Lindsay Lanning originally joined us from the Ohio State University intern program, where she was getting her degree in Health Information Management Systems. After graduation, Lindsay joined our team as the Healthcare Informatics Coordinator, where she spends her time immersing herself in the ever-changing healthcare IT environment and educating the rest of the company on new issues and trends in the industry. Kathy Thompson has been with ITENF for over 10 years. Prior to joining ITENF, she was a medical assistant at a neurosurgical practice. This is where she first got her taste of NextGen and has been hooked on it ever since. Currently, she is the managing consultant at ITENF, where she specializes in NextGen EHR and incentive programs. Over the last 3 years, she's become a meaningful use subject matter expert, along with working nonstop with our clients. Kathy will be here to help answer questions at the end. Cindy Kincaid is Vice President of Consulting Services at ITENF and is a Certified Practice Management Executive. With over 25 years in the IT healthcare industry and over 10 years at ITENF, her experience runs wide and deep. This makes it possible for her to provide the insight needed to help healthcare organizations experience great success, no matter what the challenge is. Okay, so Lindsay, I'm going to go ahead and pass the webinar off to you. Hope that you do a better job than I did with my introduction. Sorry about that in the beginning.
No problem. Thank you, Chelsea. Hi, everybody, and welcome. So thank you for taking time out of your busy week to sit in on this webinar regarding meaningful use audits. Audit isn't a very pleasant word for most people to hear. The fear of being caught for some little mistake or a missing checkbox can strike fear into even the bravest of documentation experts, whether or not they have something to hide. For providers attesting to meaningful use through the EHR incentive program, thousands of dollars are on the line, but there's no need to panic. We hope that through this webinar, we will leave you with a full understanding of the audit process, best practices on how to make sure an audit is successful, and specifically, documentation and reports needed to support your meaningful use attestation. So what if you're selected? Well, it really isn't a matter of if, but when, and it's crucial that you're prepared. Between 5 to 10% of providers who have attested will be audited each year, and this could be you. But before we get started, I want to ask all of you a few questions to evaluate how ready you are for a meaningful use audit. Number 1, will you attest for meaningful use in 2015? Number 2, will you have a complete binder of MU attestation data for this year? Number 3, if you received an audit letter today, could you have all the information CMS requested within 2 weeks? And number 4, do you have an audit binder for each of the past 6 years with all of your MU attestation data in them? These questions weren't meant to send anyone into panic mode. It was to bring attention to the fact that a lot goes into preparing for an MU audit. and it can be intimidating, but it is possible if you understand the process, what will likely be expected of you, and the key to it all, staying organized. So let's start by looking at the audit process from start to finish. First off, there are different types of audits conducted by different entities. CMS conducts pre- and post-payment audits on Medicare EHR incentive payments, while Medicaid incentive payments are audited by each state's organization. So each state manages their own audit approach, but CMS must approve the state's approach and framework. The Office of Inspector General, or OIG, has also begun to audit physicians' compliance with the Meaningful Use EHR Incentive Program. The OIG MU audits differ in several significant ways. The OIG is looking at only whether the physicians have met certain measures, and it appears that they are focusing most on CPOE and the protection of electronic patient information, which includes conducting a security risk analysis. The OIG is also looking at multiple years at once, so more dollars are at risk for an individual provider who fails the OIG audit, whereas CMS looks at a single attestation year at a time. The OIG may also be tougher on providers. CMS wants to show that meaningful use is successful and wants to justify their payout. The OIG is a lot less concerned about the success of the program. And finally, OIG audits do typically require the same documents, they just look at different things. But because the OIG's audits are being conducted via a nationwide random sample, it is possible that a provider could be audited by both OIG and CMS. And lastly, the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, is conducting audits to make sure providers are HIPAA compliant. I want to point out that MU audits are only looking at your EHR, while an OCR audit is a HIPAA audit, so it looks at all PHI and all devices. So what's the purpose of doing all these audits? Well, CMS is handing out billions of dollars to providers who reach meaningful use thresholds for quality figures during their use of an electronic health record. And bottom line, they just want to make sure the money is going to the people it's supposed to go to. CMS is just looking to make sure that the numbers you reported meet the thresholds set by the program guidelines. That's why they have oversight on payments, and a robust audit program is an essential component of that oversight. So, providers who receive an EHR incentive payment for either the Medicare or Medicaid EHR incentive program may be subject to an audit. This audit strategy is meant to address the risk of fraud and abuse by requesting that providers selected for audits submit documentation to support data reported to CMS during attestation. That means eligible professionals should retain all supporting documentation used in the completion of the attestation module responses. And documentation to support attestation data for meaningful use and CQMs should be retained for 6 years post-attestation, since that's how far back CMS can audit you. I can't stress this enough, keep everything, either paper or electronic. There are two types of audits CMS conducts on Medicare payments, and they are prepayment and post-payment audits. These prepayment audits will include random audits, as well as audits that target suspicious or abnormal data. There are numerous prepayment edits built into the EHR incentive program system to detect inaccuracies in eligibility, reporting, and payment, which would serve as the reason behind a targeted audit. For those providers selected for prepayment audits, CMS will request supporting documentation to validate submitted attestation data before releasing payment. For post-payment audits, a provider selected will be required to submit supporting documentation to validate their submitted attestation data as well. If they fail the audit, the payment will be recouped. So the audit process. Figliozzi and Company is the designated contractor performing audits on behalf of CMS. They will perform audits on Medicare and duly eligible Medicare and Medicaid providers who are participating in the EHR incentive programs. States and their contractor will perform audits on Medicaid providers participating in the Medicaid EHR incentive program. If you are selected for an audit, you will receive a letter from Figliozzi and Company with the CMS and EHR incentive program logos in the letterhead, like you see below. The request letter will be sent electronically from the auditor's email address, which is meaningfuluse@figliozzi.com, to the email address you provided during registration. It's extremely important this email is correct and someone is checking it on a timely basis. You can keep your email addresses up to date in the CMS portal. The email you will receive will contain 4 things, including the actual EP audit engagement letter in a PDF format, the document request letter, an attachment with directions on how to access the web portal, and the web portal frequently asked questions sheet. So this is a sample audit letter you would receive as a PDF in your email. You can see both logos at the top of the page, as well as Figliozzi's logo at the bottom. You will be given a date when all the information must be given to CMS, as well as 2 ways to submit the information requested, one being by mail and the other being by uploading to a secure portal provided by the auditors. You can see this letter is dated February 25th, and all their documentation was due by March 11th. That's almost exactly 2 weeks. And yes, this is a normal time range. Providers selected for audits usually have around 14 days to submit their documentation. This is why we keep stressing that all documentation and information used for attestation should be maintained in an audit file that is readily available, so as to avoid a rush in pulling together the requested documentation. This is a sample of the document request letter. This is the second thing found in the email and essentially lists everything you will need to provide CMS with. You can see the general info, core measures, and menu objectives that information is being requested on. I do want to point out that from 2015 on, there will no longer be a distinction between core and menu objectives, so these sections will be combined. Although, this is not to say that you won't receive a document request letter that looks like this in the coming years. This is because CMS can audit up to 6 years later, so this form won't become extinct until 2021. So you realize you've been selected for an audit by the email sent to you with the appropriate letter and document request form attached. You gather all of the information requested and either mail or upload it on time. What's next? Well, this is what we call the initial review process. The initial review process will be conducted at the audit contractor's location, which is called a desk audit, using the information received as a result of the initial request letter. Additional information might be needed during or after this initial review process, and in some cases an on-site review or a field audit at the provider's location could follow. A demonstration of the certified EHR system could be requested during the on-site review. A secure communication process has been established by the contractor, which will assist the provider to send any information that could be considered sensitive. All questions pertaining to audits should be directed to Figliozzi by either phone or email, and not to CMS. Maintaining documentation. When attesting to successfully demonstrate meaningful use, a provider must agree that the information submitted is true, accurate, and complete. So any and all documentation used to prove that your attestation is valid should be maintained. We will go ahead and jump into what that documentation should look like and what is going to be important in case of an audit. I do want to point out that the level of the audit review may depend on a number of factors, and it is not possible to detail all supporting documents that may be requested as a part of an audit. So while this will give you a good idea of what may be requested, it's not an all-inclusive or guaranteed portrayal of what Figliozzi will want. So preparing and maintaining documentation. It is the provider's responsibility to maintain documentation that fully supports MU and CQM data submitted during attestation. An audit may include a review of any of the documentation needed to support the information that was entered in the attestation. To ensure you are prepared for a potential audit, save any electronic or paper documentation that supports your attestation. This means any reports you ran may change from the time you attested to when you're audited. So make sure to export a copy of the report you used to attest and save it in your audit binder. Also save the documentation that supports the values you entered in the attestation module for clinical quality measures as well. As a general rule of thumb, EPs ought to err on the side of caution when it comes to documenting their meaningful use journey in order to avoid having to return those EHR incentive payments. In this case, more is certainly better. Notice I have provider's responsibility bolded and underlined. And that's because it really is the provider's responsibility to make sure they have the appropriate documentation. They may not be the ones running the reports or collecting the screenshots, but the provider still needs to be responsible for their supporting documentation, especially for past meaningful use attestations. That means if leaving a practice, the provider should have supporting documentation from the practice before leaving. And if new to a practice, make sure to obtain supporting documentation from the newly hired provider or from their prior practice. It's important if you are handling meaningful use for your providers that you know their meaningful use history. So even though there's no all-inclusive list of supporting documents that will be required for an audit, there have been 3 types of data identified as required by Figliozzi and Company for an audit. The first is the ONC certification document from the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT, showing that the provider used a certified EHR system for meaningful use attestation. So this could be a signed contract or a statement from your EHR vendor showing your proof of possession of your cert. The statement should include the provider name, the certified EHR version number you are using, and the date you started the certified version, and that you were using it during the entire reporting period. NextGen does provide this for you, which we will see in the next 2 slides. And number 2, supporting documentation used by the provider to attest for the core set of meaningful use criteria. So all percentage-based reports generated from the EHR must identify that the report was generated by the EHR. This means the EHR logo is displayed on the report, or step-by-step screenshots demonstrate how the report is generated by the EHR. And all claimed exclusions must also have supporting documentation. And number 3, supporting documentation used by the provider to attest for menu set of meaningful use criteria also needs to be provided. CMS does clearly state that the primary documentation that will be requested in all reviews is the source document that the provider used when completing the attestation. We will go over the source documents NextGen provides, and we'll show examples right after we go over the proof of certified EHR. Notice I did italicize the last type of data required because, as I touched on before, we will no longer have menu objectives moving forward, but you should still have all the supporting data for the last 6 years of menu objectives. On to the first type of data identified by Figliozzi, which is proof of certified EHR. You will need to provide a copy of the ONC certification. You can do this by requesting a proof of purchase or upgrade of NextGen software, and NextGen will provide a proof of access letter. To request this, you would complete documentation at the URL we've attached. NextGen does ask if you receive an audit letter to send a copy to muvendorletter@nextgen.com, and in that email, attach screenshots of the NextGen EHR upgrade history. And you can get that from a SQL query or if you run the MU Audit Data Crystal report. You will want to allow 3 to 5 business days for processing before you receive this proof of access letter. And you will also want to make a copy of your NextGen Healthcare License Agreement and any invoices from your original purchase. Here are some visual examples to help you understand what you'd be doing to obtain this letter. I just wanted to make sure you were able to see these and be familiar with what they look like. First is the form you would fill out to request your proof of access letter. So this is what you would see when you follow the URL on the previous slide. And on the right is an example of an actual proof of access letter, which will prove ONC certification. So on to the next type of data requested, which is supporting documentation used to attest. The first thing Figliozzi is going to look at is the source document. So what is the source document? Well, this document should provide a summary of the data that supports the information entered during attestation. Ideally, this would be a report from the certified EHR system, but other documentation may be used if a report is not available or if the information entered differs from the report. This primary document will be the starting point of most reviews and should include, at minimum, the numerators and denominators for the measures, the time period the report covers, and evidence to support that it was generated for that EP, which means it's either identified by an NPI, the CMS certification number, provider name, and practice name. So additional documentation can be used if a report is not available or if information entered differs from that report. The important thing is whatever you submit in an audit must demonstrate how the data you use to attest was accumulated and calculated. Because some certified EHR systems are unable to generate reports that limit the calculation of measures to a prior time period, CMS suggests that providers download and or print a copy of the report used at the time of attestation for their records. This is the same concept we all learned about in math class when we were younger, to show all your work so your teacher could see how you got to the answer. That's what CMS is requesting, and why the reports in your audit binder need to match the data you submitted when you attested. So make sure to export the reports you use to attest and save them and print them. I also want to point out that although the summary document is the primary review step, there could be additional and more detailed reviews of any of the measures, including review of the medical records and patient records. So the provider should be able to provide documentation to support each measure to which he or she attested, including exclusions. But let's go ahead and look at the primary source document for next-gen users, which would be the summary report found in the HQM. This is the summary report, which shows the numerator and denominator by measure for each provider. It then shows your performance, which is the threshold the provider is currently at and will use to attest. Next to this is the goal, or the threshold set forth by CMS. Any measure not being met will be highlighted in red in the performance column. Now, to gain access to this report, you need to open a support ticket and request the MU program report in HQM, and you'll need to do this each year. When you do have the reports, you will log into HQM and select the summary report for attestation, and then modified stage 2, followed by the appropriate dates for the reporting period. This will give you everything you need for attestation for percentage-based measures, with the exception if you have a third party for your patient portal. Then you will need to reach out to them and have them provide you with the numerator, since NextGen won't have access to that. Providers also have access to another report called the Measure Goal Report. The Measure Goal Report is a quick way to see a provider's performance for each measure compared to the threshold. It is easier visually to just see the green checks or the orange hazard signs to quickly identify where a provider is not meeting a measure. You really want to try running these reports monthly, if not weekly, since you want to catch any problems with meeting measures as early as possible. You will also notice that this provider is in the modified stage 2 reports already, and the measures that were removed by CMS for the new rule are still present in the report. They just have a goal of 0, so they will always show up as a green check. So providers can still check their performance with these metrics. They are just no longer required to be reported on. Now, before we delve deeper into documentation for percentage and non-percentage based measures, let's look at the other type needed, which is exclusion documentation. Documentation must be supplied to support each exclusion to a measure claimed by the provider. This can take the form of a report from the Certified EHR system that shows a 0 denominator for the measure, or otherwise documents that the provider qualifies for the exclusion. Some exclusions are not dependent on denominators. For example, if the relevant health department do not accept electronic submissions of reportable results during the reporting period, an auditor may request documentation that electronic submission was not available. Many health departments have included this information on their websites or otherwise provided confirmation regarding their ability or inability to accept electronic transmissions. So this would require dated documents for exclusions from such measures. Okay, now that we have a high-level view of what kind of information you will need to submit during an audit, we will now dive deeper into the specifics of non-percentage-based objectives. So non-percentage-based objectives. These are the objectives that require a yes attestation in order for a provider to meet the objective for meaningful use. To validate provider attestation for these objectives, additional documentation is needed. This is because not all certified EHR systems currently track compliance for non-percentage-based meaningful use objectives. The following are examples of how you may support meeting these objectives. The first, primary documentation. This is typically one or more screenshots from the certified EHR system that are dated during the EHR reporting period selected for attestation. Or secondary documentation if a screenshot is not available. A signed letter from your EHR vendor may also be helpful, stating this is available, enabled and active during the entire reporting period, and audit logs show it has not been disabled. It may be problematic to produce the required documentation for a few of the yes/no meaningful use measures. Can you supply proof that a security risk analysis was performed before the end of your reporting period? Or that your drug-to-drug interaction checks were enabled for the entire reporting period? or if you claimed an exclusion for an immunization reporting, can you document an acceptable reason for that exclusion? If the auditor is not satisfied with initial documentation, providers will receive a detailed request for more specific information. We will go over which objectives fall under this category and how you can validate provider attestation for them. The yes-no objectives for Modified Stage 2 are clinical decision support and drug-to-drug or drug-to-allergy interaction checks, secure electronic messaging, security risk analysis, and public health reporting. So for all of these, proof must be saved to prove the objective was completed, with either screenshots, documentation from the practice or state, or specific reports. For example, we'll start with clinical decision support. Identify 5 clinical decision support interventions related to 4 or more CQMs. Include screenshots of the decision support. So with CDS and drug-to-drug or drug-to-allergy interactions, you need proof that the functionality is available, enabled, and active in the system for the duration of the EHR reporting period. This can be done with a few different things. You can take a screenshot of system admin. The screenshot should show the next-gen name and that the DUR is turned on, so check interaction should say true, and that the level display minimum is set to a value greater than 0, which means your providers can't turn it off in their user preferences. You can also use a screenshot of alerts in the EHR from assorted dates during the EHR reporting period. Just make sure you're in a test patient and that you include the date in the bottom corner of the screenshot. You may also be able to get a letter from the vendor that the functionality was turned on at the start of the reporting period and was never turned off. Or you can even run an MU audit data report. There's one actually called DUR checks by provider you can select. So there's no definitive or comprehensive list of what can constitute clinical decision support. It can be broadly interpreted by CMS and ONC, and there are 2 different types, interruptive and non-interruptive. Basically, auditors must be prepared to evaluate and accept a wide range of CDS interventions. Clinical decision support may not be triggered in an obvious, event-specific way, and that's okay. It just means it's non-interruptive. It still supports clinical workflow, but does not interrupt the provider's thought process or risk alert fatigue. An example of a non-interruptive CDS intervention would be abnormal blood pressure readings that automatically appear in red text, as opposed to normal readings that appear in black text. And that would follow CMS 22 and CMS 165. Modified Stage 2 secure messaging. One way to validate a yes attestation to this objective is to create a patient portal account for a test patient. First, log into the portal and take dated screenshots of composing or sending a message to a patient's provider. Then log into the EHR with provider credentials and take dated screenshots of receiving the patient message and replying to the patient from the inbox. Then log back into the portal and take dated screenshots showing receipt of the provider's reply. Note, this is only for 2015, since secure messaging just needs to be enabled. Next year, the threshold will increase to 1 patient, and in 2017 it will increase to 5%, which means you will use the HQM report as supporting documentation for this instead. Next, we have security risk analysis. So providers should conduct one at least annually. Additional review may be required based on implementation changes, so if you're upgrading to a new cert. The security risk analysis should cover a span of an entire year. It cannot be episodic. It should be dated prior to the end of the reporting period and have the provider's NPI, CMS certification number, name, and practice on it. I will say this objective is the most frequent cause of providers to fail an MU audit, more than any other requirement. It has caused widespread confusion. While the EHR incentive program doesn't ask for anything beyond what providers are already doing under HIPAA, they must conduct the analysis within their meaningful use reporting period. The requirement for HIPAA is once every 2 years, and for meaningful use, it's once during your reporting period. So people were thinking they had already done it, but they hadn't actually done it within their reporting period. And neglecting the risk assessment can not only place physicians at risk of paying back incentive money, but they also risk a penalty from the OCR for not being in compliance with HIPAA. So you really want to make sure you get the security risk analysis done in the right time frame and thoroughly. So to reiterate, since this is where the confusion usually exists, CMS auditors are asking for proof that a security risk analysis of your cert was performed before the end of your reporting year or before you attest, whichever comes first. The report should document procedures performed during the analysis, results of the analysis, and implementation plans with target completion dates for any security deficiencies discovered during the analysis. The last non-percentage-based objective we will go over is public health reporting. You must supply supporting documentation of meeting the measure or meeting the exclusion. Documentation kept to support you are in active engagement and meeting the measure should provide the name of the registry and data confirmation of the following: proof of registration to submit data with the agency completed within 60 days of the start of the EHR reporting period, confirmation from the registry that the EP is in the process of testing or validation before the end of the reporting year or before you test, whichever comes first, or finally, confirmation from the registry that the EP is submitting production data before the end of the reporting year or before you test, whichever comes first. Like I said, you'll need documentation for exclusions as well. So save any communication for an exclusion, such as a letter from your public health agency confirming they are not accepting data at this time. Note, you must pick one of the public health agency reporting measures. If you cannot find a PHA that is able to accept information, you need to provide supporting documentation for both exclusions. But you can't select a measure meeting the exclusion if there are other public health measures you can meet. You can also provide documentation that certain measures are not within the scope of your work, such as a statement with your practice letterhead on it stating that this provider does not give immunizations with it signed and dated. Now, with these measures, we talked a lot about screenshots and adding them to your audit binder, so I want to quickly cover some basic things to check when you are taking one. First, screenshots from Certified EHR must be from the reporting period and must represent various dates during the reporting period. NextGen recommends taking them at dates in the beginning, middle, and end of the reporting period. Screenshots should show the date, provider, practice, and the Certified EHR name. And you want to make sure to redact any patient identifiers. And finally, what's the point of all this information if you don't know how to take a screenshot? There are two ways you can do this. The first is the Windows Snipping tool, which you can access from the Start menu, either under Accessories, or if you just search it in the Search Programs box, you'll be able to open it up. You will click New when it opens up and highlight the area you wish to screenshot by dragging the box over it. The second way is to simply hit the Print Screen button on your keyboard. This will take a screenshot of your entire screen and whatever is on it. It will automatically be copied to a clipboard, and all you have to do is open up a Word doc and click Paste, and it should show up. Finally, before we move on to documentation for percentage-based objectives, I want to reiterate how important it is to block out PHI. You will have just completed an entire security risk analysis on how to protect patient health information. You do not want to make the mistake of sending PHI out on a screenshot for an audit. So documentation for percentage-based objectives. Percentage-based objectives require the entry of a numerator and a denominator for attestation, and the threshold must be met. So the information needed during an audit of percentage-based objectives is found on the primary document, which is always the report from the EHR system showing the numerator, denominator, and percentage for these measures. Be sure to always keep a copy of the report you use during your attestation, and any exclusions should show denominator supports the exclusion, or a letter of explanation is needed. For example, an e-prescribing denominator on the report of less than 100 would support that the provider meets the exclusion criteria. So it doesn't always have to be a 0. It depends on that measure's specific exclusion. These percentage-based objectives should be completely taken care of on the HQM Summary Report we looked at earlier. That report contains the numerator, the denominator, the threshold, and the provider's performance. Now, this does seem a lot easier than all the different screenshots and letters, etc., that are required for non-percentage-based measures. But it is important point out what Figliozzi is specifically looking for. They will double check to ensure that the dates on the report match the reporting period dates during their attestation. They will ensure that the numerators and denominators from the reports match the numbers that were entered during attestation. And finally, Figliozzi and Company itself gave the following guidance. Please note, if you are providing a summary report from your EHR system as support for your numerators or denominators, please ensure that we can identify that the report has actually been generated by your EHR. So again, they're looking for that EHR logo displayed on the report or step-by-step screenshots which demonstrate how the reports are generated by your EHR. So once the audit is conducted and it's concluded, the provider will receive an audit determination letter from the audit contractor. This letter will inform the provider whether they were successful in meeting meaningful use. If, based on the audit, the provider is found not to be eligible for an EHR incentive payment, they will recoup or not send a payment for that reporting period, depending on if your audit was pre or post payment. If found to have fraudulently attested, CMS may pursue additional measures. Providers must use the appeals process if they believe they received an incorrect adverse audit finding. So I said CMS may also pursue additional measures against providers who attest fraudulently to receive EHR incentive payment. It is a crime to defraud the federal government, and that includes its programs. Punishment may involve imprisonment, significant fines, or both. In some states, providers may lose their licenses. Convictions may also result in exclusion from Medicare participation for a specified length of time. Intentional fraudulent activity will be referred to the FBI and the Department of Justice for further investigation. CMS takes fraud very seriously, but it's willing to work with providers to a certain extent to make the audits as smooth as possible. After all, CMS does want meaningful users. That's why the EHR incentive program exists in the first place. If you have your documents, your data is correct and properly dated, and you are participating in the program in good faith, then you have little to worry about. If you do find yourself in a position where you are not declared a meaningful user, which means you failed your audit, but do not agree with this ruling, there is an appeals process. Providers may contact the EHR Information Center through a toll-free number between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday for general questions on how to file appeals and the status of any pending appeals. An electronic appeals form must be completed and submitted to the email address you see on your screen. The appeal submission process is time-sensitive, with a 30-day window for the submission period. And the appeal will only be processed if all documentation is provided at the time of submission. And just a reminder that states will implement an appeals process for the Medicaid EHR incentive program. And Medicaid program participants should contact their state Medicaid agency for information if they have questions. Just to see how many providers do not pass their audit and may appeal, we will look at some statistics. In 2014, a Freedom of Information Act request was filed to obtain information on those audited since the program started, since the data is not automatically published by CMS. As of September of 2014, 21% of prepayment audits completed did not meet meaningful use and failed. 24% of postpayment audits completed did not meet meaningful use and failed as well. CMS is citing two main reasons for failing. The first, failure to use a certified EHR, and the second, failure to meet the appropriate objectives and associated measures. It is unclear what not meeting the MU objectives and associated measures really means, but experts assisting EPs and practices with audits and appeals think the most common audit failure results from not adequately performing a security risk analysis and not documenting actions taken to mitigate identified risks. CMS is stating that of those EPs who failed, they're returning between $42 and $19,800 per provider. The average return incentive was $16,862 per provider. You can see there's a lot of money on the line with these incentive payments, and that is why being prepared for a possible audit is crucial for providers. So now that we've worked our way completely through the audit process, let's address a few frequently asked questions. The first being, can attestation information submitted for the EHR incentive programs be updated, changed, canceled, or withdrawn after successful submission in the EHR registration and attestation system? If an EP participating in the Medicare EHR incentive program chooses to change or withdraw their attestation, an attestation amendment form or incentive payment attestation withdrawal form must be completed and sent back, along with any incentive payments already received. What is a common reason for an EP to fail an audit? One of the leading causes for failing a meaningful use audit is insufficient documentation of a security risk analysis. Do meaningful use audits only apply to the most recent attestation year? No. CMS has clear authority to audit meaningful use attestations that occurred prior to 2015, up to 6 years after attestation to be specific. So what do we recommend to pass this audit and be a successful meaningful user? Well, we suggest you create a checklist of all required documentation, print the documentation and put it in a binder, save the documentation electronically as well, keep the documentation separated from year to year. Remember, the documentation needs to be kept for 6 years. Keeping the documentation in a safe place. Ensure there are policies in place to transition the documentation should an employee leave the practice or organization. Work with and communicate with auditors. If you cannot meet a deadline, let the auditors know as soon as possible. If you have any questions about the information being requested, ask the auditors for clarification. And finally, conduct a self-audit. Internal self-audits of each measure your EP is attested to helps ensure a positive outcome to a CMS-initiated audit. It will help you understand what documentation is required to support attestation, and it will identify potential gaps in documentation that you can address with your EHR vendor. So 7 ways to prepare for an MU audit. First, assume you'll be audited. Assume you'll be audited is the best thing a physician can do. It basically will ensure the audit will go well. Because some physicians are chosen for audits at random, there is no way to completely eliminate the possibility of being audited. Respond promptly. It's also important to respond right away after receiving an audit letter. That's why it's important someone's always monitoring that email address. Getting the necessary documents in order can be a time-consuming process, and auditors generally only allow 14 days to respond. Take charge. Many small practices leave the legwork of meaningful use to practice managers. While it is good to have some level of trust in the practice manager or whomever is in charge of the legwork, it's always smart for physicians to verify for themselves that the work is being done and not simply assume. Avoid discrepancies. The auditors are looking for discrepancies between what was submitted during attestation and what was actually done. Ensure EHR certification. To satisfy the certification requirements, physicians will need documentation from their vendors confirming the version of the EHR system they are using. Physicians should monitor any upgrades to their systems to ensure that changes don't affect the certification status. Documentation is key. I think we have covered this idea enough, from the HQM reports, the screenshots, letters from vendors, to exclusion documentation. We all understand documentation really is the key. And lastly, complete a security risk analysis. Experts agree that the security risk analysis is one of the requirements that trip up many physicians. The risk analysis is one of the most difficult requirements for physicians to understand and to comply with because it's an ever-evolving document. Each time a change is made in the practice or new technology is adopted, the risk analysis must specifically address this change. So what you're looking at right now is actually a checklist created by NextGen that should be done prior to the start of your reporting period. I will let you all read through this at your own convenience, but I do want to point out 2 important ones that I may not have touched on earlier. The first is to make sure Advanced Audit is enabled and you haven't disabled any settings. Advanced Audit offloads auditing responsibility from your production database server. It works across all NextGen applications and doesn't affect the performance of NextGen EHR or PM software. And the second is to obtain your EHR Certification ID. To do this prior to attestation, you will need to go to the ONC's website. And I've supplied step-by-step instructions on the next slide. So to get your EHR Certification ID, you need to go to this website and search the comprehensive list of certified health information technology for NextGen. Make sure you know what versions you use during the reporting period, and then you add any third-party products to your cart as well. After you select your EHR and third-party products, click View Progress and then Get Certification ID, which you will then want to email to yourself and keep in your audit binder. This is just another important step that not many people either remember to do or know how to do. NextGen also gives this list on the left-hand side for what to do during the reporting period. So that's running the reports weekly, gathering screenshots, and finishing your security risk analysis. And then they also provide one for what to do after the reporting period. And that's exporting all the reports, gathering your documentation and putting it in your audit binder, and of course, attesting. So this does not have to be difficult, just very organized. And we can help. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you think you may need assistance, we are here and we have aided a number of clients with this process before. I feel like I say this at the end of every webinar regarding meaningful use, but I know this was a ton of information. So I wanted to thank you for listening, and I want to remind you that we will be sending out a copy of the slide deck, but we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions.
Hey, Lindsay, thanks. That was so much information. You did a great job with it. Again, you can answer or you can type in questions in the webinar control panel, and we'll answer them in the order that we get them. We've got a number of questions asking if we're going to be sending out the recording. Yep, later this week we're going to send out an email with a link to both the recording as well as a copy of the slides. So keep your eyes out for that. Okay, if a provider does not exclusively use NextGen and is working with another EHR system as well, how would we get their EHR certification number?
I can go ahead and grab that one. So you would get your EHR certification number from the ONC's website. Basically, going back to that slide I just went over with the step-by-step instructions, you just need to make sure that you select all of the products you used and make sure to put them in your cart. So then when you hit Get Your Certification ID, you will have a special combo code. So usually, if you're just using NextGen solely, the ID you get there would match the ID on that proof of access letter that NextGen gives you in case you get an audit. But if you use multiple systems, your ONC combo number won't match that. So you'll need to get a letter from all other vendors you use as well. But just getting that certification ID in general is just going through on that website. Just make sure instead of just adding NextGen to the cart, you add all other products as well.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, next question. Is there a template available to perform a self-audit? Cindy, do you want to answer that one?
Yes, I'll take that one. To my knowledge, there's not a single template for a self-audit. Because some of them are self-attestation and others are generating reports from the system. The best thing to do is being able to send this out, put this in, the best thing to be able to do is get your request in for the reports, be able to generate your reports often, and then also be able to generate items that you're self-attesting and print your screen prints, and then look through them often and be prepared.
Thank you, Cindy. Next question. What do I need to tell my IT department so they can get me all the update history?
There's actually a SQL query that we can send out the script to, and we send out the slide deck for you guys to have. Or you can actually run an MU audit data report. And there's two ways to do it. I think the SQL query is most effective. It's just a script, and it's actually on NextGen's website as well in their client resources under their Knowledge Exchange. But we can get that to you as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Will this be in our Dropbox? Cindy, do you and Kathy want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one on behalf of Kathy. She's actually, I own me the answer because not all of our clients have a Dropbox. This is a particular client, and yes, we can put it in the Dropbox. Kathy will take care of that. It's also, as Chelsea mentioned, it's going to be on our website, and you will be able to download it from there as well if you want to follow that link for anyone else who may have another area that they want to store it on behalf of their employees.
And also we do post links to these on all of our social media accounts. If you want to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, all that, that's where we first send out links saying where you can access the slides. And you can always ask us questions on those platforms as well. Next question. Should screenshots be taken for every provider?
Yes.
Yeah, I can go ahead and grab that one too. Yes. So make sure you realize attestation and audits are done by provider. It's not done by practice. So screenshots for those non-percentage based objectives need to be taken by provider.
Okay, great. And it looks like, Garth, you have your hand up. I'm not sure if you're trying to ask a question or not. If you are, please go ahead and type it in. Otherwise, if you just accidentally raised your hand, don't worry about it. People do it all the time. Okay, next question. If a provider does not, oh, no, I'm sorry, we covered that one. Okay, if we do not use NextGen's patient portal and have a separate third-party company, would I still be able to use the HQM Summary Report to get my numerator and denominator with the associated measure?
I've got that one. That would depend on the level of integration and if the portal is a certified product as well. There are a lot of people who use third-party portals.
I was going to say, too, to add on to that, Cindy, usually to be on the safe side, I know NextGen actually recommends that you reach out to them and get the numerator from them just to verify as well. But again, like Cindy said, it depends on the level of integration.
Right. If it's not integrated with NextGen, then there's no way NextGen is going to have the ability to generate it from their reports. You know, in terms of if you're just, the ones I've worked with in the past, because I've worked with clients that have other portals over, you know, outside of NextGen, and what will typically happen is that depending upon the level of integration, again, you're either sending the demographics or how it's linking in. So I'm going to say the answer could be yes and or no. It's all dependent on that integration.
Okay, thanks, ladies. Next question. We have 30+ providers. CMS really expects screenshots to be taken separately for every provider? It's all in the same EHR.
Okay, I've got that one as well. Unfortunately, yes. Now, that's only going to be on the items that require a screenshot for self-attestation. If you're running reports, which many of the measures are, you're going to be able to run them all at once. It is quite the challenge to be able to keep this binder up to date. And as I said, you know, we can give anyone advice on that, tell them how to do it. We've worked with groups with, you know, 100+ providers, and they have to spend the time doing it. It is a challenge. They don't make it easy.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. As a reminder, we do have a couple of webinars coming up in the future following along the same series, so keep your eyes out for invitations from those. And the same email that we're going to be sending out with links to the slides will also include a link to register for the next one of those, and you can always access any of our past webinars on our website, attentive.com/events-and-education. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that we have right now. We're going to hang on for a couple more minutes in case anybody's in the middle of typing one. But thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Question, follow-up question. Those screenshots should be taken at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the reporting period, correct?
Yes, this is correct. So if you do take screenshots, the whole point is to also verify that that function was fully enabled for the entire reporting period. So that's the purpose behind doing the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Definitely, and I also think, and to add to that, you know, again, there are some items that just have one that you have to make the attempt. I mean, again, with all of the variations, it's just safe to do it at the beginning, the end, the beginning, the middle, and the end to just show that you have been compliant, particularly on those that you have to have for the entire reporting period. Another thing that was mentioned that Kathy actually IM'd me about is even in some cases you want to make sure that you have your file maintenance screenshots of your file maintenance, i.e. that you have email turned on for your portal if you're enabling the communication. So again, those screenshots can run by provider, they can run by file maintenance. There's all kinds of areas that you need to be able to just basically think about demonstrating. I think like Lindsay said in the presentation, think about when you're in your math classes when you had to demonstrate how you got to the answer. That's really what you're looking. You have to show all aspects of how you got here. And it's really about being organized. We've had 2 clients that I've worked with personally that have been audited, and both of them have passed with flying colors. It's not to, this is not designed to scare everybody. It's just to make sure that you have everything in place when that happens, actually, because I do believe it's going to happen.
Okay, well, thank you, ladies. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And enjoy the rest of your day. Keep your eyes out for an email.
Thank you.
Bye.